The NBA wasn't always the polished, brand-friendly show that we know today, and no one proved that better than Chris Washburn. His fall from top NBA draft pick to disaster was so dramatic that he was left stealing food out of garbage cans and cooking wings for a living.
But what the NBA didn't know was they had just invested in $1 million crack in it.
The NBA's biggest bust is a label that gets thrown around a lot. Anthony Bennett may sit at the top of the list today. Back in the day, it might have been Sam Bowie or something, but I would argue that nobody busted harder in the NBA than Chris Washburn after his miserable NBA career, with post-playing days that are even harder to listen to. Washburn was an all-out prodigy in his early years, earning back-to-back All-American selections in high school. That wasn't done by Mike, that wasn't done by Kobe, and that wasn't done by Magic. This really was something special, and earned him a spot on an NC State team that featured the likes of Nate McMillan, Vinny Del Negro, and Spud Webb. Washburn would shine on the NCAA floor, putting up upwards of just under 18-7. But while dominating under college basketball's brightest lights, Washburn's life was taking a dark turn.
It had a substance. I had never seen it before. They asked me if I wanted to try it. Now, my mom hit my head first. No. They asked me again. My dad hit my head second. No. I went to the shower and came out. Now peer pressure is on. The third time I asked, I said, well, it might not hurt.
Chris Washburn began trying cocaine in college, and instantly his life began spiraling in a way he lost control of. Washburn got into trouble for little things like stealing. He'd be forced to serve 46 hours in county jail for jacking a stereo from a dorm room. In the mind of Washburn, he believed as long as he can play basketball, he can essentially neglect all other obligations, getting a minuscule 470 on his SAT exam, which is just above the 400 for writing your name on the paper, and skip class for basically the entirety of college. Washburn was a guarantee for the NBA lottery, even despite his checkered past, as in the words of Warriors coach George Karl, "We saw this 6'11" guy with talent. We had to take him. And I think he'll be a good player, maybe in 3 years, if he works, if he changes. But sometimes I wonder if we drafted the kind of player who will always break your heart." Washburn would be drafted just 3rd overall in the 1986 draft, that by all measures was likely the worst and most cursed draft in NBA history. Being drafted just one pick after Len Pius, who was a good friend of Washburn, who would meet his fate after overdosing on cocaine after the draft, and before many careers that would be wiped away due to drugs and alcohol. Washburn, having seen his own friend die due to his drug use, was put into shock, stating, "That shook me up for a minute. I couldn't grasp it. I didn't go to the funeral, it didn't make no sense to me." Washburn would get clean upon landing a 3-year, $3 million deal. George Karl states that as he arrived the first day of training camp, he was the far and away best player on the floor, surrounded by guys like Sleepy Floyd, Chris Mullin, and Joe Carroll. But living in Oakland, named the City of Dope at the time, it wasn't long before his old habits began to creep up on him. Washburn didn't get along with any of his teammates whatsoever, and out of spite he would leave practices to hang with the wrong people getting high. At 21 years old, Washburn was spending money hand over fist. Despite receiving monthly payments of $87,000, by the time the end of the month reached, Washburn would be dead broke. With a house in the hills next to Reggie Jackson and Ricky Henderson, Washburn's life seemed to be a dream. But in reality, this was a man in a living hell. Ricky Henderson even stopped next door to welcome his new neighbor, where Washburn shook his hand, slammed the door in his face, then proceeded to keep getting high. Despite living like a king, Washburn was playing like a bum. Averaging a terrible 3.8 points and 2.9 rebounds a game, his production was terrible. Chris states that he used to rip lines of blow before games until his heart felt ready to pop, just to go play in front of 25,000 people in a very physically intense sport. Doctors were surprised that this dude didn't fall over dead. Washburn would routinely skip practice strategically, as he figured the $10,000 fine for skipping was a better way to save money than the $20,000 suspension if he was found to be under the influence of drugs. Just 3 months into his career, Washburn would check into rehab, missing 2 months of his rookie season. But as soon as he got out, he got right back to what he was doing. Chris estimates that he was spending around $20,000 weekly on things like hotels, expensive hookers, and drugs, and more drugs. Washburn even started paying his friends rent and utility bills because he didn't like smoking in crack houses where you have to piss in buckets. Washburn is richer than his wildest dreams, living a life worse than a crackhead on the street. I had a 6,000 square foot house built on the side of a mountain, but I'm lying on the floor with no carpet, dirty, because I don't want to leave the drugs. GM Don Nelson pulled the plug on the Chris Washburn experiment partway through just his second season, trading him to the Hawks for a guy who would never even play in the NBA. Everything negative, Nelson said of Washburn. Lazy, bad attitude. With his skill level, you projected that if he did everything right, he could get better. He didn't do anything right. Washburn would finish his second season with an even worse stat line of just 2.4 points and 2 rebounds before re-entering rehab in 1988. And after Washburn would fail his third drug test in 3 years, he would be banned from the NBA for life. With miserable averages of 3.1 points and 2.4 rebounds per game in a career that lasted just 2 seasons, Washburn is what I would refer to as the biggest bust in NBA history. I know I'm supposed to be a Hall of Famer, but I've come to realize that I'm just in the Hall of Shame. Washburn's life would now wildly spiral out of control. He would go to serve multiple year-long prison sentences beginning in 1991, just 5 years after writing his name on that $1 million contract, to where his body was so destroyed by his lifestyle that he was coming off the bench for his penitentiary basketball team. Washburn went on to live on the streets throughout the 1990s, where he would beg strangers for money and eat the food that he found out of a garbage can. Every penny he got would go back into the hands of this crack dealer who he even witnessed murder his friend point blank. Washburn went from the neighbor of the Oakland A's stars to a 30-year-old man asking his 70-year-old mother for some money to get high. Chris reached a low point when his mother refused to fund his addiction and told him to write her name and contact info and keep it in his wallet so people would know who to notify when they found his dead body. The cycle would continue until 2000 when Chris's father would pass away. Having realized his last memory of Chris was as a loser on the street who would try to steal his wallet to buy drugs, Washburn would reach his rock bottom before finally taking his 14th trip to rehab serious enough to get sober. Washburn today has been seen working normal jobs from restaurants to mortgage lending, surely a far cry from the NBA star he was cut out to be. There's far fewer stories like Chris in the NBA today, but the dark story of Robert Swift reminded us that these are issues you can never fully get away from. Swift's downfall is certainly as heartbreaking as they come on a humane level, from reaching the highs of the NBA lottery out of high school to disappearing out of nowhere, only to be rediscovered living amongst guns and drugs on floors covered in dog shit. Growing up just outside of Bakersfield, California, Robert Swift's childhood was far from easy. Unlike many NBA stars who emerged from urban project environments, Swift grew up in a rural trailer park setting. His family struggled with financial instability, and his parents declared bankruptcy multiple times during his childhood. His upbringing was marked by constant moves and changes in schools, making it hard for him to build any lasting friendships. Though shy and introverted, Swift stood out on the basketball court due to his size and his natural talent, ultimately dominating the competition at the high school level. By his senior year, Swift was putting up an astounding 18.8 points and 16 rebounds with 6 blocks a game, earning a spot on the 2004 McDonald's All-American team. Swift initially committed to playing basketball at USC, but the lure of the NBA was too strong to resist. With agents and brands offering multi-million-dollar deals, Swift skipped college and declared for the NBA draft at 18 years old. After inking a multi-million-dollar contract with the Seattle Supersonics, a life-changing moment that seemed like the end of his family's financial struggles, the pressure of instant wealth and the expectations that came with being an NBA player quickly overwhelmed the young star. Swift's NBA career got off to a rough start. As a teenager thrusted into a professional league with grown-ass men, he found himself on a veteran-led Seattle team with Ray Allen and under the leadership of coach Nate McMillan. Neither Allen nor McMillan had much patience for the young project player, and Swift's performance on the court reflected his discomfort and a lack of confidence. He barely made an impact during his rookie season, scoring just 15 points total. His second year saw only a slight improvement, with Swift managing a modest increase in minutes and production, but still far below the expectations. The real turning point came in his third year, when Swift arrived at training camp with long, shaggy red hair and a slew of new tattoos, symbolizing what seemed to be a personal transformation. Coaches praised his work ethic and his development, and he was poised to take a starting role on the team. But just as things started to look promising, tragedy struck. Swift tore his ACL in training camp, requiring season-ending surgery. This was the first of several severe injuries that would derail his career before it got a chance to really begin. After missing the entirety of the 07 season, Swift returned the following year only to tear his meniscus just 8 games into the season. By the time he recovered, the franchise had moved to Oklahoma City, and Swift, now battling weight gain and injuries, was released by the Thunder in 2009. With his NBA career now in the rearview, Swift's personal life started to spiral a bit. He fell deep into substance abuse, first with alcohol, then with harder drugs, including heroin and methamphetamine. His body ballooned in weight, and his daily consumption of alcohol became excessive, as he reportedly drank 3,000 calories of beer just to get drunk. After welcoming his first child into the world, Swift attempted to revive his career by playing overseas in Japan, where he briefly showed flashes of his old talent, averaging over 20 points per game. Despite getting back in shape and even getting invited to an NBA tryout with the Portland Trail Blazers, Swift's hope of making a comeback was dashed when the team rescinded its offer in the last minute. At that point, Swift had just gave up. He returned to the US and retreated into his vices. The $1.3 million mansion he had purchased at the height of his NBA career became a prison of addiction and chaos. Swift's home eventually went into foreclosure, and when the authorities finally entered the residence, they were met with a disturbing scene. The once pristine home was now filled with garbage, dog feces, liquor bottles, pizza boxes, and scattered ammunition. Swift himself was living amongst it all, addicted to heroin and completely isolated from the world. Swift's refusal to vacate his foreclosed home became a symbolic moment in his downfall. Media outlets documented his standoff with authorities, and images of his disastrous living conditions circulated online. Eventually, he moved out, but things didn't get any better. As Swift's life spiraled, even fans noticed his struggles. One fan sponsored his page on Basketball Reference, pleading for donations to help him out. Swift, however, was clearly avoiding any public view. A reporter, Jason Jenks, spent months trying to track him down, but concluded in 2014 that Swift simply didn't want to be found. Swift's disappearance was tied to his deepening involvement in drugs. After bouncing from one friend's house to another, he made the disastrous decision to move in with his drug dealer, who had introduced him to heroin under the guise of offering pain relief. In exchange, Swift offered protection given his 7-foot frame and previous MMA training. The home would be invaded by the police, in which all of the drugs would be seized, as well as the underground bunker that his dealer buried under the home stocked full with explosives. Swift was even sleeping on a bed on top of numerous weapons, including a grenade launcher. Swift would be charged with illegal firearm possession as well as admitting to assisting in disputes over drug money in the past. Swift was close to a zombie at this point. He was rib skinny, frequented jails and treatment facilities, and as his ocean of dope dried up, he was going through intense withdrawals. Swift would be forced to move back in with family that he supported financially through his much more prosperous years, after making world news as a disastrous collapse. And after working through recovery programs, working jobs like landscaping to help get back on his feet, and getting into basketball once again, Swift was able to land a 2-year deal with Spain in 2018, playing professional basketball once again just 3.5 years after living a life out of a horror movie. Up to this point, Swift has gone mostly off the grid to the public eye, which I'm sure he prefers. But with heroin relapse rates at times reaching upwards of 97%, let's just hope that we don't hear about him again for a very long time. Chris Herren was really the last guy you'd expect to be a junkie on the streets. He was a high school phenom. He dominated at BMC Durfee High School, setting a state record for points and earning All-American honors. With college offers from top programs like Duke and Kentucky, the future seemed incredibly bright. But Herren decided to stay close to home, attending Boston College where he could play for his hometown team. Unfortunately, the decision to stay home would soon be overshadowed by a series of poor choices. While still a freshman at Boston College, Herren was introduced to cocaine during a routine hangout session with friends. Initially, it was casual, an occasional line or two, but before long, the drug became an essential part of life. The decision was a turning point, as his off-court behavior began to spiral out of control. He continued using drugs despite the risks of his health and future, and it wasn't long before the consequences caught up with him. In the middle of his freshman year, Herren was caught in a random drug test which came back positive for blow, His addiction was now publicly exposed, and his college career seemed to be over. Boston College swiftly dismissed him, and his life seemed to be crumbling around him. The dismissal was a turning point, and Herren later admitted how devastating it was to be booted from the team he had dreamed of playing for his entire life. However, this wasn't the end of his basketball career. After being cut from Boston College, Herren was offered a second chance by coach Jerry Tarkanian at Fresno State. He recognized Herren's potential and offered him a chance to start over. But even with this new opportunity, Herren continued to struggle with addiction. He was still using drugs, and though he played well on the court, averaging over 15 and 5 a game, his addiction followed him to dark places. His struggles with drugs became more public as his college career continued. In his junior year, he failed yet another drug test and was forced to admit on national television that he was an addict. The public confession led him to rehab, but he didn't take the treatment seriously at all. He returned to Fresno State and played for one more season, but his off-the-court problems continued to intensify. His addiction was spiraling by the end of his college career, and his path to the NBA seemed uncertain. However, the Denver Nuggets in the second round of the 1999 NBA draft took a chance on Chris Herren, but it was clear his struggles with addiction were not behind him. He played a very limited role in the NBA, and after being traded back home to the Boston Celtics, his demons returned with him. While on the Celtics, he found himself more focused on drugs than basketball. And 4 minutes before a game, he would be seen on the side of the road buying prescription pills in his warm-up jacket. This constant battle with addiction led to his eventual release from the Celtics after just one season. Herren's downfall continued, and after injuries and a series of drug overdoses, he found himself entangled in legal trouble. His drug use led him to make reckless decisions, including a tragic incident where he ran over a woman while under the influence, which only deepened his spiral into self-destruction. Finally, after a series of arrests and near-death experiences, Herren's rock-bottom moment came. His addiction had torn his family apart, and he was now at the point where he considered actions of no return. In a last-ditch effort, Herren cut himself off from everyone, entering rehab once again, this time committing to the process, staying clean, found redemption, and rebuilt his life over the next decade. Today, Chris Herren is an advocate for addiction recovery, sharing his personal stories and helping others avoid the same pitfalls that derailed his once promising career. Richard Dumas has one of the more out-of-the-ordinary stories of any NBA player. If that name rings any bells, maybe remember him as a crucial piece of the 1993 Suns, who were the closest team of any to take down Michael Jordan on his run of terror in the NBA Finals. Dumas' career was soaring to crazy heights in just his rookie season. Hell, this guy was about to be moved in a trade for Dennis Rodman, but chose to alter his life and alter the history of basketball due to his own actions, causing a disastrous downward spiral. Dumas' history of substance abuse goes all the way back to 5 years old, where his dad did not know how to handle an ADHD kid, and the best fix he had for him was to feed him beer to get him to relax. This, of course, made a ticking time bomb. At 13, he moved on to smoking cigarettes and tree, liquor, and pain meds to get his fix. Despite constantly needing to feel something, what became clear was that being under the influence was his normal. Dumas would go on to dominate high school, winning 4 state championships, averaging over 20 a game, all while needing to drink a few beers before every game to calm his nerves. Dumas had always felt uneasy with the bright lights and packed crowds of high school games, which made him anxious. To cope with his anxiety, he would need to get his buzz on, a habit that would continue throughout his playing career. While this might seem like a strange ritual for Dumas, it became a normal way to get through his day-to-day life and perform at his very best. His ability to dominate on court despite his substance abuse added to the mystery of his talent, but the cracks were already starting to show beneath the surface. The seeds of his downfall had been planted very early on, and though he had incredible potential and ridiculous talent, his addiction was already taking its toll. Richard made 2 very big decisions his senior year. 1 to attend hometown Oklahoma State, and 2 to hit the joint his friend lit up that was laced with crack cocaine. Richard outfound his new school and his new love in his drug of choice, and was close to home where he had the ease of access given his status as an athletic star and a hometown hero. Richard's use would get more and more intense, and after a freshman year averaging 17 and 6, he would see his numbers drop year after year as his drug use would amp up. What seems to be a usual trend with any drug user on any team is that their use is not a secret in the locker rooms. Everyone knew that Dumas was a crackhead, and throughout his tenure he was routinely running into trouble stemming from his use. Before 12 games into his 3rd season, Oklahoma would boot their star forward from the team for continued drug use, ending his collegiate career altogether. Dumas would receive another chance to get back onto his feet, but this time he wasn't going to be able to play in his own backyard. He was forced to pack his bags and play professionally in Israel. The cultural shock and habitual changes really forced Dumas to screw his head on right. And it was at this point that we saw what this guy could really do. Putting up an impressive 21 points, 8 rebounds, and 2 assists on a hyper-efficient 59% from the field, this dude took a train wreck and got it back on the rails in a major way. And despite having his college eligibility back, Dumas chose to skip out on a potential senior season to take on the NBA draft. Dumas would be drafted 46th overall by the Phoenix Suns in the 1991 draft, a far shot from what looked like to be his future just a few years ago, but a spot in the NBA nonetheless. Due to major concerns with his off-the-court issues, this dude was a no-go list for plenty of teams. And sadly, those concerns would quickly be validated as before the commencement of his rookie season, Dumas would already test positive for coke and receive a year-long suspension for the 1991-1992 season. Dumas would once again take to overseas play throughout his would-be rookie year before enrolling in John Lucas's rehab program and receiving a second shot with the Suns in 1992. And holy hell was this a better performance. Now putting down the rocks and picking up a six-pack before every game, Dumas put up a very good 16 and 4.6 per game in a limited role as a rookie. With 1.8 steals and nearly a block, Dumas was a guy who constantly made plays on both ends of the ball, whether it was getting into passing lanes and making the right rotation, cutting or spotting up. Dumas was a really good glue guy who really can elevate any contending team with good talent around him. And that's exactly what he did. The Suns were a major powerhouse at 62-20 this year, before being shut down by John Paxson's FU 3 ball to put the Suns to bed. But at 16-4 in the NBA Finals, Dumas definitely played his role to a high level and shattered whatever expectations you could have for a rookie that's coming off a crack suspension. Richard was sitting highly coming off a season where it really seemed that he proved any possible doubt wrong, until Richard Dumas became Richard Dumbass. While in Hawaii for an autograph signing, Dumas would be offered a quick hit of a rock. By the end of the trip, Richard and this guy were driving to the other side of the island to go cook up some pure blow before Dumas would be stranded out on the other side of the island. After the NBA would have to go and get their star, Dumas would be forced to check into rehab, in which the league began cracking down on even his alcohol consumption. Dumas would fail yet another drug test, concluding in a suspension for what would be the Suns' comeback year after a close but no cigar season. For Dumas would play just 15 games in '94 before being waived by the Suns. Dumas would get his final chance in the NBA on the 76ers, where despite playing just 20 minutes a game, Dumas managed to put up just a measly 6 points as a shell of his former self at just 26 years old. Dumas' opinion on the reason for his downfall, of course, had nothing to do with himself, but with John Lucas breathalyzing him before games, ensuring that he couldn't crush his six-pack before every tip-off. Just like that, after one real season, Dumas was done. And unfortunately, the same addiction that derailed his career continued to plague him for years, leading to a series of legal troubles, arrests, and a life filled with financial instability. His personal demons, primarily cocaine addiction, kept him on a path of self-destruction. His life off the court became more chaotic, with his drug use becoming uncontrollable and eventually leading to multiple arrests. In 1997, he was arrested on drug-related charges in Arizona, highlighting his continued struggles with substance abuse. But the legal troubles didn't stop there. In 2013, Dumas was arrested on charges of organized retail theft, after being caught stealing thousands of dollars worth of merchandise from various retail stores. This arrest illustrated just how far he had fallen since his days as an NBA player. From a star on the court to someone entangled in petty theft, Dumas' fall from grace was pretty heartbreaking. Throughout these years, Dumas also faced several minor offenses like driving without a license and violating probation, all of which compounded his growing list of criminal charges. Despite efforts to turn his life around, including stints playing basketball overseas and attempts to get clean, his past actions and addiction problems continually haunted him. His repeated run-ins with the law and inability to break free of his destructive habits prevented him from really ever fully rebuilding his life. Dumas is really just a sad story, as a guy who just started chasing that dragon at a disgustingly young age and was never able to beat the demons that plagued him. One of the greatest careers the NBA never fully got to witness came crashing down at the turn of the decade. Had he been around in 1970, no one could have predicted the train wreck that was about to unfold. because Spencer Haywood was on top of the world and then some. His rise to stardom was nothing short of spectacular. After earning a spot on Team USA out of junior college, Haywood's monumental journey began with a bang. At just 20 years old in the ABA, Spencer Haywood put together one of the most impressive rookie seasons we have ever seen, leading the Denver Rockets to the top seed while averaging a jaw-dropping 30 points and 20 rebounds per game. He took home Rookie of the Year that year and the MVP trophy in his first season, an astonishing feat that signaled the arrival of the next transcendent big man. Haywood checked every box for a dominant player in an era ruled by size and physicality. What set him apart was his unique blend of finesse and touch, which made him look like the future of basketball altogether. When he transitioned to the NBA in his second season, there was hardly any drop-off. Playing for the Sonics, Haywood averaged 26 points, 13.6 rebounds, and 1.5 blocks per game from the ages of 20 to 25. He was an automatic all-star and already one of the best players in the league. The only problem? Seattle's team was freaking terrible. Then, in what should have been a defining moment for his career, Haywood was traded to the New York Knicks at 25 years old, just as he was entering his prime. He was set to form a powerful duo with Bob McAdoo, and all signs pointed to a continued ascent. But the opposite happened. Haywood's game began to unravel almost immediately. The reasons for his decline soon became painfully clear. Haywood had discovered something else he loved: cocaine. As his drug use escalated, his game regressed. His scoring average dipped from 19 points per game to 16, then to 13. But even those declining stats were nothing compared to the chaos that was soon to follow. At 29 years old, Haywood found himself on a Los Angeles Lakers team that was on the verge of greatness, alongside a young Magic Johnson and the legendary Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. The Lakers hoped to fill their power forward position with a once great player, but Haywood was too busy filling his nose instead. Life in LA proved to be too tempting. While in New York, Haywood had indulged in the occasional party and bump of cocaine. In LA, things escalated. Haywood wasn't just casually using. He was driving his Rolls Royce down to the beach to smoke crack. The glitz and glamour of Hollywood mixed with Haywood's self-destructive habits created the perfect storm of shit. According to Haywood, he wasn't the only player on the Lakers dabbling in drugs, but his usage was on a completely different level. The breaking point came during the 1980 NBA Finals, where before Game 3, Haywood passed out during stretches, leaving his teammates in a panic, unable to wake him. They feared that they had just witnessed the death of their teammate and friend right in front of them. Luckily, Haywood regained consciousness, but the scare was enough for head coach Paul Westhead, who was done with Haywood's behavior. Westhead made the difficult decision to release Haywood at the height of their championship run. But this wasn't rock bottom for Haywood. It was still ahead. Angry and delusional, Haywood refused to take any accountability for his actions, and instead blamed the coach for punishing him. In the midst of a cocaine-fueled rage, Haywood hatched a plan that almost turned into a real-life nightmare. He decided Westhead had to die. Haywood contacted a longtime friend, a real gangster in his words, and together, they plotted to kill his former coach. They even tracked down Westhead's home address and were ready to move forward with the plan. Fortunately, Haywood's mother intervened, talking him out of what would be the stupidest fucking mistake I've ever heard in my life. In the wake of this near disaster, Haywood fled the country to play in Italy for 2 years, where he finally sought help for his addiction. He eventually returned to the NBA for 2 more seasons, cleaned up, but never quite the same as before. Despite earning a spot in the Hall of Fame, Haywood's legacy is forever marred by the drugs that derailed his once bright future. What began as an incredible story of perseverance and talent, a kid from junior college dominating the best basketball league in the world, was undone completely by addiction and stupidity. A few lines and pipes turned Haywood into what looked like the future of basketball, into a man teetering on the edge of tragedy. It's not the kind of story the NBA wants to feature in his Hall of Fame biography, but it's the reality of a career that could have been one for the ages. Thank you for watching. If you guys made it this far, check out my last video here if you missed it, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.